Hi, everybody. It's meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Happy New Year to you. Thought we'd take a look at what's going on weather-wise as we have some moisture that's building up in the southeast and central Gulf states, and high pressure is about to move out of the northeast. And in the meantime, we've got some snows in the west forecast for Oregon, Washington, into Montana, and also down into parts of the southwest as well, in New Mexico and parts of eastern Arizona. So one of the things that you should notice here, by the way, we have this, I've often been talking about the fact that we have this negative North Atlantic oscillation. In other words, we have blocking going on. And what that does, and this kind of shows it really well, except that we don't have any real cold air around. But you'll notice that, first off, a low starts to form out here through Mississippi and winds up going to the northeast in the Ohio Valley. Meanwhile, you've got this wave that develops on the warm front that's out to the south. So that kind of pinches down some cold air, relatively speaking. But because you have that blocking, there's a high up here now that rebuilds up over Labrador. So that sort of prevents this low from becoming the main low and running northeastward. So instead, it reforms. You see how it kind of center jumps there? It goes into eastern Ohio and West Virginia, and then reforms off the New Jersey coast, and that becomes the main low. So it goes where there's the path of least resistance. And this is what's going to be happening over the next 2 days. In the east here, we're going to get a shot of moisture on Monday, and the ground level temperatures in some place might be cold enough for it to be freezing precipitation, but then that low redevelops and moves out. In the meantime, the snow's back here up in through Montana, spread through the Dakotas and Minnesota, and that carries on to the northeast. So now you've got this big high that's building down with a lot of cold air, and that spreads out through much of the eastern half of the United States. All of the eastern half of the United States by Thursday, Friday is cold. The problem is that a few days ago, the models were not showing this big high to spread out the way it is. Instead, it was going to kind of hang back, and that was going to allow for a couple of waves and some overrunning. But instead, everything is suppressed much further south and east, so you can see where the wave winds up forming. It forms out just out in the ocean, and it actually even shows a little bit of snows to the coastal Carolinas. And then you've got this low that comes out of the the Rockies, with some snows there through Colorado and Nebraska and Missouri, and then on the GFS anyway, it carries eastward. But again, because the cold air is suppressing, this is only going to be able to get so far north before it moves out to the east. So this is a pretty decent shot of cold air that's going to begin on Thursday and take us right through the first part of next week. Now, I'll show you on the upper air how this plays out, because this is where we've had a bit of a change in what was forecast to happen, and you'll see it good on the North America view here. And there we have it. So let's back it up. So here's what's happening. So here we are on January 1st, and you can see on this is from this morning, so I'll just move it up to this evening, and there you have it. Okay, so here we have the big blocking high over Greenland, okay, and then we have this other blocking high out near Alaska. So that's kind of sets up the flow across the United States, but you don't have a really strong vortex at this point. It's there over Hudson's Bay, but it's not such a dominating feature that it's drawing cold air all the way south. Instead, it gets cut off and gets deflected eastward into eastern Canada. So that's why there's no cold air for this weather system that's coming out now to work on. Now, what happens over time, and this is where the models actually were showing this for this past weekend, and then a weaker second shot, and it wound up reversing. So now the first shot wound up being weaker, and the second shot winds up being stronger. So here we have the jet stream for later next week, and you've just got this cold flow that comes straight out of northern Canada into the east. And the problem is that there's no room here for any kind of storm development. So weather systems tend to stay very weak and disorganized, and that's what the current model cycle is indicating. And then after that trough on Sunday begins to lift out, you start to get a ridge that sort of forms here in the eastern states, and you start to re-fire up that upper air low out in the west. So as we move over time, it looks like we may warm up briefly into the middle of the month. And then after that, who knows? It looks like that there's a colder flow setting up potentially for the second half of the month. I don't know. And of course, I haven't really completely closed the door on what's going to happen later this week, because there's just too many little strands of energy running around, and models keep keying on different strands on every run, and that's made things very, very confusing, to say the least. But for now, we're going to just kind of go with the way things are and see how it plays out over the next few days. Just want to show you on the Canadian model, because it is a little different. You can see there's that first system, so then that goes out. The Canadian it spreads the cold air out, but it's not as deep as the GFS. So it does bring this wave out, this first wave out in the ocean, a little bit closer. And then it brings the second wave also a little bit closer, because it's not, it doesn't spread the cold air out in such a suppressing way that the GFS does. And then that moves away to the northeast, and then we watch to see what happens afterward as that cold air begins to pull out and we move into the period of January 10th and January 11th. When we look at the European, and the European, of course, has its own ideas on all of this. We don't have, we have that big vortex kind of spreads out the cold air and suppresses things. Although again, the European does try to bring precip close. This trough that it shows for Saturday is actually not. It's not that weak. It's fairly well defined, but the model doesn't seem to be able to do much with it. And then that moves out, and then you can see it builds the ridge back up in the longer term, back into the east by around January 10th, January 11th. So, it's a very, very frustrating process that we go through in the forecast world. There's no question of that, and it can drive you crazy, because you kind of get set things on certain things that are going to happen 3 or 4 runs in a row, and then all of a sudden it does something else. I do want to point out something very interesting. There's some kind of upper low that cuts off east of the Bahamas, and this is going to wind up becoming some sort of gale center. At least that's what the models seem to be showing. The GFS has been doing this for a couple of days, and you'll see it here. So some kind of gale center forms right here. You see here, this is early next week, northeast of Puerto Rico, and then it just kind of sits there and meanders around off the Atlantic coast for several days. And with this, if this is real, this is one of the reasons why the ridge may eventually wind up, at least temporarily, building back into the east, because you have this storm out in the Atlantic. So you have a trough out here, and then you have a trough here. So you wind up with a ridge that tries to build in between the two. So this might be key to longer term developments, depending on what this does or doesn't do assuming that it's real. Later we go into this coming weekend and into early next week. So we'll check it out tomorrow and see what gives here. Download my app, subscribe to my forecast, just 99 cents a month. I'll put the link up right now, and don't forget to check the latest posts on the website, meteorologistjoechaffee.com. Have a great day. I hope your New Year's was good, and we'll see you tomorrow.